She was 84 years old. She lived alone. She had a pacemaker keeping her heart beating and medication she could not survive without. She had spent more than 50 years building a life in Tucson, Arizona, raised her children there, buried her husband there, and grown old in the same community that had known her name for half a century. On a perfectly ordinary Saturday night in January of 2026, her daughter's husband drove her home from a family dinner, watched her walk inside, and closed the garage door behind her. 2 minutes. That was the last confirmed moment anyone saw Nancy Guthrie alive. And then she was gone. No woodbie, no note, no trace, except for the blood they found on her front porch the next afternoon, the camera that had been physically ripped from her doorframe, and a grainy black and white image of a figure standing in the dark. Masked, gloved, armed, a backpack on their shoulders, and a flashlight clenched between their teeth. Someone had planned this. Someone had studied her home, learned her routines, and chosen a window in the middle of the night when an 84-year-old woman living alone would have no way to fight back. The FBI has recovered footage most people assumed was deleted forever. Tips have flooded in by the tens of thousands. A man was detained, questioned, and released. Ransom notes went to tabloids instead of her family. And through all of it, Nancy Guthrie has not been found. If this case matters to you, subscribe to True Crimes J right now and hit that notification bell. This story is moving fast, and you do not want to miss a single update as it develops. Nancy Guthrie was not a woman who lived quietly in the background of her own life. She was sharp, present, and deeply connected to the people around her. Born and raised with a sense of community woven into everything she did. She had followed her husband Charles to Arizona in the early 1970s, and Tucson became home in every real sense of the word. She raised 3 children there. She watched her grandchildren grow. She attended church services, kept in touch with friends, and by all accounts remained mentally vivid well into her 80s despite the physical limitations that had come with age. Her mobility had declined over time, and she depended on daily medication to manage a heart condition serious enough to require a pacemaker implanted in her chest. That pacemaker was connected to a monitoring app on her phone, a digital lifeline that allowed healthcare providers to track her heart's activity in real time. Her daughter Savannah had become one of the most recognized faces on American television, serving as the co-anchor of NBC's Today Show. Her other daughter, Annie, lived close by in Tucson, which meant Nancy had family within reach and a reason to make the short drive across town on a regular basis. Annie was married to Tommaso Cioni, an Italian-born teacher and poet who had been living in the United States since 2006. The family gathered often. Dinners, game nights, the ordinary rhythms of people who genuinely enjoyed each other's company. And on the evening of Saturday, January 31st, 2026, Nancy took part in one of those ordinary gatherings for what would turn out to be the last time. She called an Uber at around 5:32 in the afternoon and rode over to Annie's home in the Catalina foothills. Dinner was made. Games were played. The evening unfolded the way dozens of evenings before it had unfolded. Nothing about that night suggested anything was wrong. When the evening wound down and it came time for Nancy to head home, it was Tommaso Cioni who offered to drive her. The distance was short. The drive was unremarkable. Surveillance data would later confirm that Nancy's garage door opened at approximately 9:48 in the evening and closed again at 9:50. 2 minutes. Cioni later told investigators that he had made sure Nancy was safely inside before he pulled away. 2 minutes to confirm she was home. 2 minutes and a closing garage door. And that was it. That 2-minute window is the last confirmed proof that Nancy Guthrie was alive inside her own house. Everything after that is silence, timestamps, and unanswered questions. What investigators would later piece together from the digital trail left behind that night reads less like a timeline and more like a countdown to something terrible. Nancy's Google Nest doorbell camera, the device mounted at her front door, the one meant to give her a first line of visibility into whoever approached her home, was disconnected at 1:47 in the morning on February 1st. That is just under 4 hours after Cioni left. Nancy did not pay for a Nest subscription service, which meant the camera was not running continuous recording. It only activated on motion events, and without that subscription, the footage it captured was not being preserved in the kind of straightforward way most people assume. At 2:12 in the morning, the camera's motion sensor detected movement outside. Something triggered it. The camera registered what was happening on that porch. But in the immediate aftermath of Nancy's disappearance, investigators were told there was no usable video to recover. At 2:28 in the morning, Nancy's pacemaker app disconnected from her phone. Stop for a moment and let that land. This was not a battery dying. This was not a software glitch on an otherwise unremarkable night. This was the monitoring system for a woman's implanted cardiac device going dark in the middle of the night, less than 3 hours after she had walked through her own front door. For a woman whose heart required daily management, that disconnection was not a technical inconvenience. It was a red flag of the most serious kind. And no one knew it had happened until the next day, when the calls went unanswered and the welfare check turned into something far more grave. Nancy did not appear for a virtual church service with a friend the next morning. That alone was enough to worry the people who knew her schedule. When family members went to check on her around noon on February 1st, they did not find her. They called 911. Deputies from the Pima County Sheriff's Department arrived at 12:15 in the afternoon, and what they encountered inside that house immediately changed the nature of everything. This was no longer a welfare check. Sheriff Chris Nanos addressed the press with the measured language of someone who understood the weight of what he was about to say. He described the conditions inside the home as very concerning and inconsistent with a voluntary disappearance. Homicide investigators were brought in. Search deputies were deployed. The house was sealed as a crime scene. Blood was found on the front porch. Not a drop, not an ambiguous smear. Blood that forensic testing would later confirm belonged to Nancy Guthrie. Personal items were gone from the residence, and the Nest doorbell camera that had been mounted by her front door had been physically removed. Not unplugged, not disabled remotely. Taken. Sheriff Nanos said it plainly. He did not believe Nancy left her home on her own. The evidence pointed in one direction and one direction only. She had been taken from her home in the middle of the night by someone who came prepared, someone who knew what they were targeting, and someone who had taken steps to make sure they left as little trace as possible. They killed the camera. They timed their approach for the deepest hours of the night. They knew this woman lived alone. They knew her routines, and they thought they had covered their tracks. What they did not count on was the FBI's ability to reach into the digital afterlife and pull back something that should have been gone. For 10 days after Nancy's disappearance, the public knew almost nothing beyond the bare outline of what had happened. Then on February 10th, FBI Director Kash Patel made a post that stopped the internet cold. 6 black and white photographs, 3 video clips, all of them recovered from Nancy Guthrie's disconnected Nest camera. The same camera that investigators had initially been told contained no usable footage because of the lack of subscription. What Patel explained was that the FBI had worked alongside private sector partners to excavate these images from residual data sitting in back-end systems. Digital fragments. The kind of data that lingers in infrastructure even after the user-facing footage appears to be gone. The kind of data that most people, including the person who ripped that camera off the wall, would assume no longer existed. And what those images showed was chilling. A figure standing on Nancy Guthrie's front porch in the early morning hours of February 1st, dressed in a full-face ski mask, dark gloves, a zip-up jacket, khaki-colored pants, sneakers, a backpack slung across their shoulders. At the person's waist, clearly visible in at least one frame, a holstered handgun. The individual appears to be holding a flashlight in their mouth, keeping both hands free for what they have come to do. The footage captures the moment this person reaches toward the camera with one gloved hand, attempting to cover the lens. When that does not fully work, they reach toward a nearby shrub, grab a handful of branches, and press them directly against the camera to block the view. And in one of the clips, the figure tilts their head deliberately downward while moving through the front archway, angling their face away from any direct shot. This was not someone stumbling onto that porch by accident. Every movement carries the logic of someone who knew they were being watched and was working to make sure that watching produced nothing useful. On February 12th, the FBI released a forensic breakdown of what the footage revealed. The suspects stand between 5 feet 9 and 5 feet 10 inches tall with an average build. The backpack has been identified as a black 25-liter Ozark Trail hiker pack, an inexpensive, widely available model sold at Walmart stores across the country. The FBI released reference photographs of the exact same model for public comparison. Former FBI profiler Jim Clementi noted during coverage of the case that what appeared to be a tattoo might be visible on the suspect's right wrist, a detail that, if confirmed, could become one of the most important identifying features in the entire investigation. But the face behind the mask remains unknown. The identity behind those eyes remains a mystery. What happened next demonstrated just how hungry the public had been for something concrete to hold on to. Within hours of the footage being released, the FBI tip line was overwhelmed. Over 4,000 calls came in that single day alone, pushing the total number of tips received since the investigation began past 18,000. People were watching, people were paying attention, and people believed they might know something. If you're still with this story right now, drop a comment below with the words, "I'm still here." Let's see who is truly following what happened to Nancy Guthrie. And if you have not subscribed to True Crimes J yet, do it now. Every update on this case goes straight to your feed. In any investigation involving a missing person, law enforcement begins where logic demands they begin, with the people closest to the victim. The people with access. The people who knew the home, the schedule, the medication routine, the layout of the property, the fact that an 84-year-old woman with limited mobility lived there alone. Tommaso Cioni sat at the very top of that list. He was the last known person to see Nancy Guthrie alive. He drove her home. He watched her go inside. He left at 9:50 in the evening. And roughly 4 hours later, a masked figure with a gun and a backpack appeared on her front porch. On February 4th, FBI agents appeared at the Tucson home shared by Annie Guthrie and Tommaso Cioni. The property was searched. A vehicle connected to the investigation was impounded. The sheriff's office declined to confirm whose vehicle it was, declined to explain what had prompted the seizure, and declined to elaborate on what, if anything, had been found. That same week, journalist Ashley Banfield reported on her podcast that a trusted law enforcement source had named Cioni as a possible prime suspect in the case. She referenced his place in the timeline, his familiarity with Nancy's home, and the fact that he was among the last people to have any contact with Nancy before the world lost track of her. The Pima County Sheriff's Department pushed back firmly and publicly. No suspects have been officially named. No persons of interest have been designated. Sheriff Nanos told the press that his investigators were treating everyone who had contact with Nancy as part of standard procedure. But in the same breath, he did not deny that family members had been interviewed. He did not deny the search of Annie and Tommaso's home. And he did not deny the vehicle seizure. The silence around those confirmations was its own kind of signal. Social media moved faster than any press conference could contain. Annie Guthrie's Facebook page appeared to have had family photos removed or restricted, including images featuring Cioni. An unverified document surfaced online, a power of attorney reportedly showing that Cioni had designated Annie as his legal agent for property matters. Legal professionals were quick to point out that such documents are entirely routine and carry no inherent suggestion of wrongdoing. But on the internet, in the middle of a case this emotionally charged, context rarely catches up to implication. The document spread. The speculation grew. And through all of it, the official record remained the same. Cioni was cooperating with investigators, he had not been arrested, and he had not been cleared. That space between cooperation and clearance became one of the most uncomfortable places in the entire investigation. While all of that was unfolding, a different kind of mystery was developing in newsrooms across the country. On February 2nd, Cold TV, a CBS affiliate based in Tucson, reported that it had received a letter demanding payment for Nancy Guthrie's release. The note contained details about Nancy's home and about what she had been wearing on the night she disappeared. Details specific enough that investigators took it seriously. The following day, TMZ reported receiving its own alleged ransom communication. this one demanding millions of dollars in Bitcoin, complete with a specific cryptocurrency wallet address and a hard deadline. Days later, a second note arrived with language that TMZ described as deeply chilling, stating that only one communication would be made and asserting that Nancy herself was aware of the demands. But something about the pattern did not fit. In a genuine kidnapping for ransom, the abductor's priority is money. And the most direct path to money is contact with the people who have the means and the motivation to pay, the family. These notes were going to television stations and entertainment media, not to the Guthries. Former FBI behavioral analyst Catherine Schweit told NBC that the logic simply did not hold together. If your goal is actually to collect ransom, you do not debut your demands to TMZ. You go directly to the family. You create urgency. You create fear. You make them feel they have no choice. 2 ransom deadlines came and passed. The FBI stated that it was not aware of any direct communication between kidnappers and the Guthrie family. Something about the ransom story was not adding up, and the reason why became clearer when, on February 5th, a California man was arrested on federal charges for allegedly impersonating the abductor and attempting to extract money from the family. According to prosecutors, he had sent messages to Annie Guthrie and Tommaso Cioni about a Bitcoin transaction almost immediately after the family released their first public video about Nancy's disappearance. He had watched the grief on that screen and seen an opportunity. He was released on $20,000 bond with electronic monitoring and a prohibition on contacting anyone connected to the case. TMZ later reported fresh activity in the Bitcoin wallet address from the first note. The amount was not disclosed, and whether that movement was connected to the real perpetrator or to yet another opportunist remains unknown. On February 7th, Savannah Guthrie appeared on camera alongside her siblings. The video was addressed, implicitly and unmistakably, to whoever was holding their mother. Savannah said they had received a message, that they understood what was being asked of them, and that they would pay. The delivery was raw in a way that could not be rehearsed. The voice of a daughter who is terrified and trying to hold it together for the sake of keeping her mother alive. The video was deliberately vague about exactly which communication it was responding to, and the question it left hanging in the air was the one nobody could yet answer. Was any of this reaching the person who actually had Nancy? Or had the real story of her disappearance diverged entirely from the ransom narrative playing out in the press? The release of the doorbell footage on February 10th didn't just generate tips. It triggered movement in the field almost immediately. Within hours of Patel's post, Pima County Sheriff's deputies pulled over a man during a traffic stop in Rio Rico, Arizona, a community roughly 60 miles south of Tucson, sitting close to the Mexican border. A court-authorized search warrant was served on both a residential property and a vehicle in the area that same evening. The atmosphere around the development suggested this was significant. By the following morning, the man had been released without any charges being filed. He gave his name as Carlos Palazuelos and described himself as a delivery driver who thought he might have dropped off a package at Nancy's address at some point, though he could not specifically recall doing so. His mother-in-law spoke to reporters and said he had been at her home during the time Nancy disappeared. She described him as a man with no criminal record and no connection to anything like this. Palazuelos himself told the press that investigators had told him his eyes matched the eyes of the masked figure in the doorbell footage, a comparison that, by his account, was what had drawn attention to him in the first place. He said he did not even know who Nancy Guthrie was before all of this began. Sheriff Nanos later confirmed that after an interview and a forensic review, Palazuelos had been determined not to be involved. He was ruled out. The Rio Rico property was cleared. And once again, the investigation settled back into the weight of what it had always been. Thousands of tips, no confirmed leads, and no Nancy Guthrie. The forensic work, meanwhile, had been expanding in ways that did not always make the front page. On February 13th, the Pima County Sheriff's Office confirmed that investigators had recovered a pair of black gloves, which were being submitted for DNA analysis. There was initial confusion when a television network incorrectly reported that the gloves had been found at Nancy's property, a detail the sheriff's office moved quickly to correct. The gloves were not found at Nancy's home. Where exactly they were found was not disclosed to the public. Separately, investigators revealed that DNA had been collected from inside Nancy's residence that did not match her profile or the profiles of anyone known to have regular contact with her. That unknown DNA sample had been sent for testing, and those results were still pending. The FBI broadened its request for surveillance footage to anyone within a 2-mile radius of Nancy's home, covering more than a month of recordings between January 1st and February 2nd. Roadway searches were launched across multiple routes through the Catalina foothills area. The reward for information leading to Nancy was doubled, from $50,000 to $100,000. Her case was added to the FBI's most wanted listing, with a poster featuring the masked figure from the doorbell footage published alongside the reward information. When reporters asked President Trump about the case of the White House, he said progress had been made since the FBI had gotten involved. When asked whether a cartel or a foreign actor might be behind the abduction, he said it was too early to draw that conclusion, but added that whoever was responsible had either known exactly what they were doing or had been rank amateurs. Sheriff Nanos, speaking to local press, acknowledged that good leads had been developed while admitting there were still no confirmed signs of Nancy. A press conference, he said, will be called only when there was something significant enough to warrant one. And so the case sat, heavy with evidence that pointed inward and questions that had no public answers. 13 days into this investigation, the gap between what is known and what is not known is difficult to sit with. The method of entry into Nancy's home has never been publicly confirmed. How did the intruder get inside? Through the front door? The garage? A window? Were there signs of forced entry? And if so, what did they reveal about the person who made them? Where is the doorbell camera that was removed from the wall? Was it taken by the intruder as a precaution, discarded along a route away from the home, dropped somewhere in the darkness? Are any of the ransom notes authentic? The FBI has not confirmed that a single one of them originated from the actual abductor. One produced a federal fraud arrest. The others exist in a kind of investigative limbo, with no resolution in sight. What vehicle was used to move Nancy? She had limited mobility. She could not have walked out of that neighborhood in the dark, in her condition, without someone carrying her or supporting her. Whoever took her needed transportation. They needed a plan for moving an 84-year-old woman quietly and without drawing attention in the middle of the night. And who, ultimately, was standing on that porch? The mask conceals the face. The gloves remove the fingerprints. The deliberate camera blocking reveals premeditation. But the Walmart backpack, the awkward branch grab, the visible holster, those details suggest someone who prepared but not perfectly. Someone who thought through the plan but left edges exposed. And beneath every single one of those questions lives the one that matters more than all the rest combined. Is Nancy Guthrie still alive? She needs daily medication. Her pacemaker has been without its monitoring connection for nearly 2 weeks. Every passing day, without proof of life, tips the scale in a direction her family refuses to accept publicly, even as it becomes harder and harder for anyone watching from the outside to hold onto the same hope. Sheriff Nanos has said he believes she is still out there. Her family has said they believe it too. And maybe they are right. Maybe Nancy Guthrie is somewhere waiting to be found. The DNA results have not come back. The gloves have not been matched. The thousands of tips have not all been followed to their end. The FBI's forensic team has already proven it can retrieve what everyone assumed was permanently lost. This investigation is not over. Not even close. But the truth remains, right now, an 84-year-old woman with a heart condition and a family that loves her is missing. And the person who took her is still walking around with a face nobody has seen. Somewhere out there, someone recognizes something. The eyes in that footage, the shape of those hands, that specific backpack before the night it appeared on a porch in Tucson. Someone has a piece of this puzzle and may not even realize how important it is. If you have any information at all about the disappearance of Nancy Guthrie, call the FBI at 1-800-CALL-FBI. The reward is $100,000. Someone knows something. It is only a matter of time before that information finds the light. This case is not slowing down, it is building. And when it finally breaks, it is going to break all at once. Subscribe to True Crimes J right now. Hit the like button so this story reaches more people, and share this video with someone who needs to hear Nancy Guthrie's name. The next update could be the one that changes everything. Don't miss it.